What happens when a black CEO is removed from his business class seat just to make room for a white passenger? What happens 10 minutes later when that man orders the captain off the plane? Security was called, but not for him, and the entire airline shaken from the top. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when one man stays seated and makes the whole system stand still. Where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city in the comments, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the stories. They never show on the news. Now, let me tell you what really happened on that flight. The air was sharp with that artificial chill only airplanes seem to have. Overhead bins clicked shut as passengers filed into their seats, dragging tote bags and toddlers, business suits, and bad moods. At row 2A, a man in a charcoal cap and blue wool blazer paused and glanced down at his seat assignment again, as if he were double-checking a memory. "Excuse me, sir." A voice rang out, clipped and chilly. "You're in the wrong section. Boarding for economy is still ongoing." He looked up slowly. The flight attendant was blonde, mid-40s, shoulders squared like she'd drawn a hard line on the floor and dared him to cross it. Isaiah Ellison didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head slightly, warm brown eyes meeting hers. "This is seat 2A, he said, holding out his boarding pass. His tone was calm, not defensive, not apologetic. The woman barely looked at the pass. "First class is reserved for premium members, sir. Business travelers, you'll need to wait for general boarding." Isaiah let the moment breathe. "I am a business traveler," he replied evenly. "This is my seat." The attendant's name tag caught the overhead light. Rachel Baines. She crossed her arms. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we verify. There's been a mistake." Passengers seated nearby began to glance over. A few lowered their newspapers. One woman in 3D slowly reached for her phone, tapping the camera icon without taking her eyes off the scene. Isaiah's voice didn't rise. "Rachel, I think the mistake is assuming I don't belong here." Rachel gave a tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "I'll ask one more time, sir." Before Isaiah could answer, a man leaned into the aisle from seat 2, sea white, khaki blazer, voice low and paternal. "Why don't you just let her handle it, friend? No need to make a scene." Isaiah turned to him. "I'm not making a scene. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for." Rachel sighed loudly. "We'll need to remove you if you can't comply." Still, Isaiah didn't move. He gently set his leather briefcase on the floor beside his feet. His hands rested on his knees. He was still wearing his coat. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I've taken this exact flight 17 times in the last 3 years. Seat 2A, Orient Air, business class. Do I need to pull up the receipts?" "You need to step aside." Her voice cracked now, not from fear, but from being challenged. A sharp ping echoed overhead as the cabin lights dimmed for departure. But nothing else moved. Just Isaiah, seated, staring ahead. Silent. Dorothy Fields, row 4B, reached for her phone. She tapped record. Her fingers trembled. Rachel was speaking into her headset now, voice sharp. "Requesting ground support at gate 12. Passenger refusing to comply." The murmur in the cabin turned electric. And then came him. Officer Jim Darden, a man built like a linebacker but with tired eyes. "Problem here?" he asked. Rachel pointed. "He refuses to move, says this is his seat, but the system shows—" Isaiah interrupted gently. "May I speak directly to the gate agent?" His voice still calm, still no anger, but the tone shifted from requesting to instructing. Officer Darden hesitated. From behind him a younger woman approached, a ground staffer in Orion Navy. Her name badge read Layla Jordan. "I'm the gate agent on this boarding group," she said. Her eyes darted between Isaiah, Rachel, and the phone in Dorothy's hands. Something was off. She felt it. "Can I see the boarding pass?" Isaiah handed it to her wordlessly. She scanned it. Twice. and then paused. Layla's eyebrows furrowed. "This is completely valid. Business class 2A platinum status." She looked up. "There's no mistake." Rachel stiffened. "Then the system must be wrong." A woman's voice cut through. "No, you are." All heads turned. Dorothy stood up slowly in her row, phone still recording. "This man did nothing but sit in the seat he paid for. I've flown long enough to know what this is." Her voice didn't tremble now. "You're assuming he doesn't belong because he's black and he's not wearing a Rolex or slick shoes?" Rachel flushed. Ma'am, that's not what this is." "No?" Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "Then why haven't you questioned anyone else in this section?" The cabin held its breath. Isaiah stood, not because he was told, but because he had decided it was time. He picked up his briefcase slowly, turned to Rachel and said in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "I'm stepping aside, not backing down." He looked at Layla. "Thank you for doing your job." And then he walked, not to the back of the plane, but to the front of the jet bridge, calm, upright, unshaken. Dorothy's voice whispered into her phone, still recording, "He's walking like a man who knows the next move is his." The door closed behind him, but the story had just opened. Dorothy Fields didn't even mean to post it, at least not at first. She had returned to her seat, fingers still cold from holding her phone up so long. Her breathing hadn't quite steadied yet. Something about the way that man, Isaiah, had looked at the flight attendant. It sat heavy on her chest. She rewound the clip, watched it again. Rachel's voice, sharp and smug. "This section is for premium passengers only." Then Isaiah's calm reply, "I am a business traveler. This is my seat." And that silence. The kind of silence black folks know all too well, when the world waits to see if you'll lose your temper, the trap of dignity or fury. Dorothy exhaled. She tapped send to her granddaughter, just to share what had happened. Then, almost absent-mindedly, her thumb hovered over the TikTok icon. Title box blinked. Caption, "He bought that seat. She just didn't want to believe it." She hit post. Didn't even look back. By the time she tucked her phone into her coat pocket, it had already passed 230 views. By the time she reached for her bottle of water, the number had doubled. 10 minutes later, the comment section was on fire. Layla Jordan had been back at her station for 5 minutes, but she hadn't logged the gate closure yet. Her mind kept circling the man's face, the tone he used, the words he chose. "I've taken this exact flight 17 times. That wasn't how most people talked, not in moments like that. Something didn't sit right. She reopened the Orion internal CRM, typed, "Ellison, Isaiah." The system blinked, then populated a profile. Isaiah, R-A-L-I-S-O-N. ANAR Platinum Tier, 8 years, verified ID, last 12-month spend, $412,000, 0 cents. Total lifetime value, $1.60 M. Assigned concierge liaison, VP level. Layla blinked. She clicked to the Linked Entities tab. There it was. Linked Entity, Ellison Holdings Stakeholder Type Minority Investor Board Approved Access Level. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Then she whispered aloud, "Wait, what?" Carla Jennings hadn't spoken a word since boarding. She had noticed the exchange, of course. Most of the cabin had. But as a corporate attorney who dealt with high-stakes mergers and billionaire egos daily, she'd trained herself not to get involved. But now her ears perked up. She'd heard Layla mention a name. Ellison. Carla turned slowly toward the jet bridge window. Isaiah Ellison. Where had she heard it before? She unlocked her phone and opened Google, typed Isaiah Ellison Orion. The top result? Forbes. Ellison Holdings founder acquires minority stake in Orion Air. Another article, Bloomberg. The quiet billionaire who saved Fremont Steel. Carla sat back in her seat, the words echoing in her head. He doesn't belong here. No, she thought. He belongs anywhere he wants. Dorothy wasn't much for social media, but her phone buzzed again, and eventually curiosity won. She unlocked it. Her TikTok had jumped to 14,000 views. There were nearly 300 comments. Most were furious, some were tearful, a few were just stunned. At Delta Dawn 67, I've flown with Orion 17 times. This is racism, plain and simple. At midnight, Sonia, he stayed calm. That's power. At K Washington 98, somebody tag the NAACP. Then, at Crackling Rose, he's calm, because he's dangerous. I bet y'all messed with the wrong one. Dorothy swallowed hard. Her hand rested gently on her scarf, heart thudding. From across the aisle, a college-age girl with braids leaned over. "Miss, you posted that video, right?" Dorothy nodded slowly. "It's going viral," the girl said, "like serious viral." Dorothy looked back toward the jet bridge door. "I think they're about to learn who he is." Isaiah Ellison sat in a quiet corner of the VIP lounge, legs crossed at the ankle, palms resting on the armrest. His phone lay face down on the side table, screen dark. The world outside the glass was moving. Crew carts, blinking lights, taxis crawling past Terminal C, but Isaiah wasn't watching any of it. He was watching his reflection, still, unmoving, like he was waiting for the right moment to speak, to no one. Behind him, a junior Orion staffer in uniform hesitated, then stepped closer. "Sir," the young man said, nerves tight in his voice, I've been asked to see if you would be willing to speak to someone from our operations team." Isaiah didn't turn, didn't blink, just replied, voice low, "They have 7 minutes left." The young man froze. He didn't know what the countdown meant, but somehow he understood it had already begun. The lounge was quieter than usual. Isaiah Ellison remained seated, one leg crossed over the other, coat still buttoned. He hadn't touched the espresso sitting on the tray beside him. He hadn't picked up his phone, hadn't adjusted his watch, hadn't moved. But he was thinking, not about revenge, about systems, leverage, timing. He looked down at the gold-rimmed face of his watch. 3:12 p.m., exactly 12 minutes since Rachel Baines told him he didn't belong. He reached for his phone, tapped the screen once. No notifications. Of course not. They wouldn't text first. He opened his contacts, scrolled, stopped, tapped a name. The call rang once, then Angela. He didn't wait for her to respond. Activated. 10-minute countdown. Then he ended the call. No explanation, no debate. At the same time, 2 terminals away, a man in a navy broom suit was walking out of an executive briefing. Gordon Tran, VP of Operations for Orion Air's Southeast Division, had barely stepped into the hallway when his phone buzzed. An urgent message popped up from the internal control center. "Incoming activation protocol, illicit holdings clause 12B, flagged for ops chain escalation. Immediate review required." He stopped walking. He reread it, then reread it again. A cold sweat broke across the back of his neck. "Oh no," he whispered. He turned and bolted back toward the emergency conference room. Back at gate 12, Layla Jordan stood frozen in front of her screen. She had only gone back to the check-in terminal to double-check the flight manifest, just to be sure, just in case. But now the screen had changed. A banner appeared at the top in crimson. Board directive logged. Investor action triggered. Layla had never seen that line before. She didn't even know it existed. She tapped through security protocols, buried 5 layers deep, and there it was. Name, Ethan IARR. Listen. Authority level. Investor override / tier 2. Access verified. Action timer 9:22 remaining. Layla slowly sat down. She didn't know what this meant exactly, but she knew what it wasn't. This wasn't a man trying to scam an upgrade. This was someone holding something sharp and pulling it very slowly from its sheath. In row 3A, Carla Jennings was still on her phone. She wasn't scrolling anymore. She was reading, lips moving, brain racing. She'd found Ellison Holdings' 2023 financials. Not only did they own minority stakes in Orion Air, they were one of the top 10 corporate clients across all carriers, the kind of client whose logo sat on internal pitch decks and investor reports, the kind of client no one, absolutely no one, wanted to lose. She leaned forward slightly, just enough to glance out the window toward the jet bridge. He was still there, still sitting, still not blinking. In the control center, alarms weren't ringing. Not yet, but terminals were lighting up. A young intern leaned over to Gordon and whispered, "Sir, someone just activated Protocol Ellison." Gordon didn't look up. He was already dialing the CEO. Meanwhile, in the concourse hallway, a janitor pushing a mop cart paused to answer his buzzing phone. He listened for a second, nodded, and veered off course. Behind him, another uniformed staffer changed direction mid-walk. No words, just movement. As if something invisible had rippled through the building. At 3:17 p.m., in the VIP lounge, Isaiah Ellison finally took a sip of the espresso, then placed the cup down gently. The young staffer from earlier returned, face pale. "Sir, Mr. Ellison, I've been informed that someone from the board would like to—" He trailed off. Isaiah looked up at him for the first time. 7 minutes, he said softly. "They're behind schedule." He stood, buttoned his coat, and picked up his briefcase. But he didn't move toward the gate. He moved toward the internal glass door marked "Authorized Access Only." The staffer stepped aside. Isaiah didn't ask. He simply walked through, like he had always belonged there. And far above the terminal, in a glass-paneled conference room inside Orion's regional headquarters, a red banner appeared on the main monitor. Ellison Holdings, board clause initiated, countdown 7:48, immediate response required. A woman in a gray blazer looked at the screen, then at her team, then down at the single sentence in the email she had just received. "You asked him to leave seat 2A. Now he's asking who needs to leave the plane." She whispered it aloud, and the room went still. The automatic doors leading into the operations wing of Terminal C hissed open without resistance. No one stopped him. No one asked for ID. No one said a word. Isaiah Ellison walked with the kind of steady calm that made people step aside before they even realized why. A man in a headset glanced up from his desk, hesitated, then turned away, pretending to read a clipboard. Another young assistant fumbled for a badge scanner that Isaiah never paused to use. He didn't need clearance. The room recognized authority, even when it wasn't announced. Layla Jordan caught a glimpse of him passing through the glass divider between public and internal zones. She was still at gate 12, clutching her tablet, heart pounding. As he passed, Isaiah turned slightly, not breaking stride, and looked at her. No smile, no signal, but his eyes said, "Keep watching." And she did. In the crew lounge just off the concourse, Rachel Baines was still rattling. "I don't care what they say. He was aggressive, entitled. He made me feel unsafe, and he refused to move." Her voice was pitched to carry. Several staffers nearby sipped coffee in silence, eyes low but ears tuned. The supervisor on duty, a man named Russell with thinning hair and a badge that said Team Lead, nodded along but kept glancing at his phone. Rachel didn't notice. She was too busy narrating her own version of events. "I've seen this before," she added with emphasis. "These people get clever. They find loopholes, print fake passes, claim statuses they don't have. You give them 1 inch, and the whole system collapses." Behind her, Layla entered the room. She hadn't meant to, but she'd followed the movement instinctively. "Actually," Layla started, voice quiet but firm, "his pass was verified. Platinum tier, 8-year flyer. And—" Rachel spun around, cutting her off. "You're not authorized to speak on crew procedures. Go back to the gate." Layla blinked. Rachel stared her down like she was swatting a mosquito. But Rachel didn't know what Layla had seen on her screen, didn't know what Isaiah had just walked into, didn't realize she wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. Across the tarmac in the terminal's glass-walled control hub, a sudden flurry of activity broke the monotony of blinking lights and routine checklists. One of the analysts looked up from his screen. "Hey, did we just get bumped out of internal routing?" His colleague leaned over. "What do you mean?" "The seat reassign system just locked. I can't override. And this looks like an external trigger." "From who?" The screen answered for them. "Investor Intervention Protocol, Tier 2, Ellison Holdings, countdown, 4:03. The analyst swallowed. He'd never seen that line before. It wasn't part of his training. Another supervisor entered, holding a printed alert. "Flight 177 operations, manual override required, advisory review pending." Someone asked, "Who the hell is Ellison Holdings?" Nobody answered. But the silence was louder than any alarm. Inside the operations wing, Isaiah stood at the center of a room filled with keyboards, headsets, and confusion. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply looked at the senior-most person present, a woman with a nameplate that read Deborah Flint, Ops Manager, and said, "Who here has the authority to replace the flight crew on Orion 177? The room paused. Deborah looked around, stalling. "Well, that would typically require director-level clearance." Isaiah nodded. "Then I suggest you call someone who qualifies. You now have 3 minutes." His voice was soft. But no one doubted the weight of the clock he had just set in motion. Deborah didn't argue. She picked up the red phone. 2 minutes later, a young runner from corporate sprinted into the room, holding a cream-colored envelope. He looked around, spotted Isaiah, and walked straight toward him, no questions asked. The envelope bore a silver seal embossed with 2 letters, EH. Underneath it, printed cleanly in serif font, "Governance Trigger, Clause 7B, initiated by I.R. Ellison." Deborah accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. She opened it. Inside were 4 documents. A notarized copy of Ellison Holdings' investor rights contract with Orion Air, a board resolution authorizing emergency intervention under Clause 7B, a printed directive recommending immediate suspension of Flight 177's pilot and lead flight attendant pending review, and a final page unsigned. "To be completed upon fulfillment, confirmation of flight crew replacement, Gate 12 passenger reinstatement, public apology protocol, prep." The room had gone still. No alarms, no raised voices, just the quiet surgical hum of a system being reset from within. Someone in the back whispered, not loud enough to stop the inevitable, "This isn't a correction." The doors to the concourse hadn't closed, but the atmosphere had. It wasn't a normal delay anymore. It was something else, like the air had shifted, and everybody knew it, but no one wanted to say the words. A young woman with box braids and AirPods in her ears stood at the edge of Gate 12. She wasn't watching dance trends. She was watching that video. The one where the old man didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't shout, just stayed calm. The one with the white flight attendant pointing and scolding like he was a child. The comments were flying. "His calm is terrifying. That's the power y'all tried to erase. Imagine being that wrong to the right person. They done called the wrong granddaddy boy." The girl lifted her head, looked down the terminal toward the closed doors of the staff wing. She didn't know what was going on back there, but she whispered under her breath, "He's not done." Dorothy Fields was seated again. This time she wasn't alone. People had started gathering around her, mostly black women. One wore a Delta Zeta jacket. Another had a HBCU proud tote bag. There was a younger woman with natural curls and a baby on her hip. They hadn't planned it, they just drifted over. Quiet, still, but watching. I knew he wasn't regular, Dorothy said. I knew it the way he stood. I seen too many men try to puff up and still look scared, but him, he wasn't scared. He was choosing. Someone asked, "You know who he is?" Dorothy shook her head. I don't need to. The system's reacting like it knows. There was a murmur, then silence. Then the baby on the woman's hip let out a small giggle, and somehow that laugh made it feel even more serious. Back inside the regional office of Orion Air, a new email landed in the CEO's inbox. Subject line, Escalation, Investor Tier Trigger, Ellison Holdings / Active Override. The CEO, Terrence Doyle, skimmed the lines. His face shifted from bored to baffled. What the hell is going on at Terminal C? His assistant stammered, "Sir, apparently one of the board-approved stakeholders initiated Protocol 7B, Passenger Interaction Incident, Flight 177. He leaned back. Who? Isaiah Ellison. There was a pause, then another man at the table. From the legal team? Nearly dropped his coffee. The Isaiah Ellison? Heads turned. He's the one who stopped the takeover of Fremont Steel, the guy who pulled out of the Atlantic merger and made the other side fold. He's not just a stakeholder, he's a strategist. The room fell silent. The CEO sat up straight, his tone changed. Get me his file, get me the footage, and get me the name of every crew member who spoke to him. Carla Jennings was still on the plane. Most people had assumed the flight would take off soon, just a minor delay. But Carla had kept reading. Every article, every board record, every investment. She now knew that Ellison Holdings owned 3.2% of Orion Air's parent company. That may not sound like much, but in corporate warfare, 3.2% with voting power could set an agenda, block a decision, even restructure leadership. Carla leaned across the aisle to the man next to her, a pale guy in a hoodie, still watching sports highlights. You know who that man was? He shrugged. Some old dude with an ego? Carla didn't blink. He could have bought this plane and fired the captain mid-air legally if he wanted to. The guy stared. She added, and he hasn't even raised his voice. At other gates, whispers started. A flight attendant checking tickets at Gate 15 heard someone mention Ellison. Another passenger pulled up the video on her phone and gasped. In the staff lounge, two pilots refreshed their emails and saw a company bulletin flagged URGANT, Investor Intervention in Progress. Somewhere in a private Facebook group for airline staff, a screenshot began circulating. It showed the internal log. Ellison Holdings, board closet open in front of him. Flight 177, effective immediately. Crew change under review. Governance alert filed. One person commented, "Who the hell is this guy?" Another replied, "Someone who just made the whole company hold its breath." Isaiah was seated again, not back in the lounge, but in a glass-walled conference room on the second level, where board representatives usually met during audits. His phone buzzed once. He answered, a voice on the other end, low, careful, white. "Mr. Ellison, we'd like to offer our sincerest apology on behalf of Orion, and we would appreciate your guidance on how to proceed from here." Isaiah didn't answer immediately. He let the pause breathe, then said, calmly, "Your apology doesn't belong to me." Click. He ended the call. The clock above the regional command room read 3:48 p.m. That meant exactly 36 minutes since Isaiah had been told he was in the wrong seat. In that time, no security was called. No manager had dared speak Isaiah's name aloud unless it was to whisper. No apology had been made. Not the kind that mattered. But the system had already begun to pivot. And now, it was about to turn. 3 regional directors and 2 legal advisors were crammed into a glass-walled conference room that normally served as a quiet overlook. Today it felt like a war room. Isaiah sat at the head of the table. He hadn't asked to. They simply didn't stop him. No one in the room was technically below him. Not by title, not by chain of command, but that didn't matter anymore. Not when he was the only one not sweating. A junior director tried to offer a bottle of water. Isaiah waved it off. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and said, "The crew of Flight 177 will be relieved of duty today, and this incident will be filed not as a passenger conflict, but as an internal breach of investor protocol." Someone coughed. Another man shifted in his seat. The room held still. Then someone dared to ask, "Mr. Ellison, are you requesting that formally?" Isaiah didn't blink. "I'm not requesting." Back in the crew lounge, Rachel was on her third retelling of the story, this time to a union rep on speakerphone. "I'm being treated like a criminal. Meanwhile, he's walking through our private offices like he owns the building." She laughed bitterly. "Well, maybe he does, but that doesn't give him the right to intimidate staff." Layla stepped into the room. There was something different in her posture now, a steadiness, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there earlier. "I just got word," Layla said. "Flight 177's departure is postponed. Crew reassignment is underway. And Rachel?" Rachel froze. Layla met her eyes and added, "Legal's in the building. They asked for you by name." For the first time all day, Rachel had no comeback. In a corporate suite across the country, in a city where time was 2 hours behind, a woman picked up her phone. She was part of Orion's senior board, the kind of name that didn't appear on press releases. She answered simply, "Isaiah." He didn't greet her, didn't ask how she was. He spoke clearly, "This isn't about embarrassment. It's about precedent. I won't file suit. I won't speak to the press. But I will not remain on that plane or in your system unless there is public recognition of what occurred. Not to protect me, to prevent it for others." There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "Understood." And just like that, it was done. Out in the gate area, murmurs began again. The screen above Gate 12 had changed. No longer said "Flight delayed." It now said "Flight 177, reassignment in progress." Passengers were whispering, checking their phones, glancing at staff. One man in a business suit muttered, "What is going on?" Another woman said, "They've been in that room for 40 minutes. That ain't no standard delay." The girl with the braids from earlier scrolled TikTok. Now the video had 88,000 views. Someone new had commented, "They just pulled the captain off the plane. I repeat, they pulled the captain. This is not normal." Inside the glass room, Isaiah slowly rose from his chair. He gathered his briefcase, closed it, adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. "Thank you for your time," he said. No one stood with him. They just watched. Watched him push in his chair, watched him walk to the door. And just before he exited, he turned back and asked, "Who's escorting the new crew to the plane?" It wasn't a question, it was an order. Dressed politely, a woman from HR stood up. "I'll handle it, sir." Isaiah nodded once, then stepped out. The ripple effect reached the baggage crew, the catering team, the captain's lounge. People were starting to say it out loud now. "That man in the gray coat? Yeah, the one they tried to kick off? He's not just on the board, he moves the board. And he just had the flight crew removed? Damn." Back near security, a janitor leaned on his mop and grinned. "Told you, he wasn't mad, he was measuring." The terminal was no longer just a transit point. It was becoming something else. People weren't scrolling past anymore. They were stopping, watching, whispering. The story had changed. This wasn't about a seat. It was about who gets to be calm, who gets to be believed, who gets to stay seated in their dignity, and who's told to move. Miles away, in a small apartment in Atlanta, a girl named Soraya Ellison was halfway through her sociology homework when her phone began blowing up. Text after text. "Girl, is this your grandfather? Turn on TikTok right now, he trending." And "It's fire." She opened the app. There he was. Same calm face, same suit, same posture, same silence, but now millions of eyes were watching. Soraya didn't cry, she smiled, because she knew exactly what was happening. "He didn't go viral," she whispered. "He made the system go still." Back in the terminal, a woman in a church hat and thick glasses who'd been quiet for over an hour finally spoke up. "I seen this before," she said. The group around her leaned in. Same spirit, different uniform. Back then it was the back of the bus. Now it's seat 2A. She took a sip from her paper coffee cup, looked dead ahead. But they messed up this time. 'Cause this brother, he didn't just read the policy, he helped write it. The younger women around her nodded. Dorothy smiled, whispering, "Say that?" Across platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, the clip had reached critical velocity. Someone uploaded a side-by-side left screen Rosa Parks, right screen Isaiah Ellison seated in his gray coat. Caption, "Different seat, same story, but this time the seat stays his." A verified user tweeted, "This isn't just a viral clip. This is what grace under pressure looks like. This is what legacy feels like." Hashtags flooded in, even though we won't name them here. Comment sections filled with stories. "My uncle was dragged off a plane in '98 for asking a question. My mom was called sweetheart and downgraded. My sister was told, maybe next time, earn elite." Now they had a face, now they had a moment. And people were no longer just watching, they were remembering. Isaiah had returned to the gate area, not to board, not yet. He stood beside the glass, watching the new flight crew prepare outside. He said nothing. But Layla approached slowly. She carried a folder. The printed protocol response already signed. Her voice was small. "Sir, they're ready to begin reboarding. Your seat is open." Isaiah turned to her. "You've handled this better than most," he said, then paused. "But don't forget what this place tried to turn you into when it got scared." Layla blinked, her throat caught. "I won't," she said. Then she added softer, "Thank you for staying." Isaiah didn't respond, but he nodded once and stepped toward the gate. The walkway was silent. No crowd, no camera crew, just Isaiah, briefcase in hand, steps steady. He entered the plane. A new attendant, young, nervous, clearly briefed, greeted him. "Mr. Ellison, welcome back aboard. We're honored to have you." Sagovic inclined his head. Walked down the aisle, paused at row 2, seat A. Window. It was empty. Waiting. He sat, fastened his belt, looked out. No smile, but the stillness of a man who had returned. Not just to his seat, but to his place. In living rooms, on phones, at dinner tables, in barbershops, in group chats, in church halls. The story traveled, not as gossip, not as drama, but as evidence. Evidence that the tides were still capable of turning. That every time someone tried to erase dignity with policy, there were still those who refused to leave quietly. And in the last scene of the day, far above the clouds, Isaiah sat with his head leaned slightly back, eyes closed. He hadn't demanded headlines, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't asked to be seen. But now the world couldn't unsee him. They thought silence would help them, but silence only worked when the other side didn't know what it meant. And Isaiah Ellison? He had made silence feel louder than every headline combined. At Orion Air's corporate headquarters, every floor buzzed with emergency mode. The CEO stood at the center of the boardroom, tie loosened, forehead shiny. "Draft the statement. Immediate release. I want a full public apology on every platform by 6 p.m. The head of PR, a woman in navy with flawless lipstick and shaking hands, spoke up. "We could go with something neutral. Blame miscommunication. Express empathy without admitting fault." The legal team nodded. A young analyst raised a hesitant hand. "Sir, Ellison hasn't spoken to the press yet." That made everyone look up. The PR head blinked. He hasn't? No, the analyst said. Not a word, not a tweet, not even a repost. The room paused. And then the head of PR said what they were all thinking. Oh God, he's letting the internet speak for him. At exactly 4:12 p.m., a message landed in Isaiah's inbox. It began. Dear Mr. Ellison, we sincerely regret the incident involving a seat assignment mix-up on Flight 177. Please know that Orient Air is committed to... He read the first line, then the second, then stopped. He didn't scroll, didn't click the attached voucher. He didn't mark it for follow-up, he simply tapped delete. No hesitation, no archive, just gone. Because apologies designed by committees didn't mean accountability, they meant containment. Isaiah was back at his hotel, still dressed, jacket off, shirt crisp. His phone rang. He recognized the number, didn't hesitate. Isaiah, said a voice, slow and southern. It belonged to Charles Wynn, a man Isaiah once pulled out of a multi-million-dollar bankruptcy. You saved my granddaddy's name, got his farm protected from those oil people. I ain't forgot. Isaiah said nothing. Charles went on. I watched the clip, watched the board panic. I just can't believe they doing this to you. Isaiah spoke softly. They're not doing it to me. They're doing it to the idea that someone like me doesn't have to flinch when they do. Charles swallowed. You want me to pull the vote? Isaiah paused, then said, no. Let them vote. Let the public know who stayed silent. Charles didn't argue. He understood. Silence would cost more than policy ever had. Back at her apartment, Dorothy sat with her niece watching the Orient Air apology video. A clean-cut executive in a suit read from a teleprompter. Words like respect, dignity, review of protocol. Dorothy leaned forward, squinted. Look at him, blinking every second like the truth trying to escape his eyes. Her niece giggled. Dorothy shook her head. They're not sorry for what happened. They're sorry it was him. The young girl added, they sorry it trended. Dorothy nodded, then reached for the remote. Click, screen off. That evening at a small-town education fundraiser in Jackson, Mississippi, Isaiah was the keynote speaker. The event had been scheduled months in advance. No press, no national spotlight. But now, there were microphones, cameras, people who didn't even know what the fundraiser was for. They just came to see him. After his speech on community reinvestment and student scholarships, a reporter shouted, Mr. Ellison, do you plan to sue Orion? Isaiah looked out at the crowd, paused, then smiled. No, I'm too busy funding the next generation to waste time fixing the last one. The crowd applauded. Another reporter pushed forward. So, what do you want Orion to learn? Isaiah's smile faded, but his voice stayed calm. That being wrong loudly isn't strength. Being right, quietly, is power. And with that he stepped down from the podium. No mic drop, no walk-off music, just a man who had already made his statement without needing to say a single thing. Until now. Not every apology needs a microphone. Sometimes the truest ones happen face to face. And sometimes they're not even about being forgiven. They're about being willing to stand in the silence you caused. She sat alone. No makeup today, no mate tag, just a blank white blouse, sleeves wrinkled at the cuffs. No one yelled at her, no one cursed. HR didn't fire her? Not yet. But something had shifted. The way Layla looked at her. The way other crew passed her in the hall without a word. The way her own reflection felt like a stranger. Layla entered, holding a slim folder. She placed it gently on the table. You should read this. Rachel looked down. Printed in black ink, Isaiah R. Ellison, voting stakeholder, Tier 2 override authority. And below that, an excerpt of the board governance manual. Rachel swallowed. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Back in the mirror, Rachel tried to find the version of herself she believed in, but the mirror didn't lie. She saw a woman who pointed her finger, who raised her voice, who acted like her authority was under attack, when really, it was just unearned. She remembered being 5 years old. Her grandmother's housekeeper, Miss Thelma, had brown hands that smelled like lemon soap. Miss Thelma called her baby and made cinnamon toast. Rachel used to think she understood, but today she'd realized she never understood. She'd just been comfortable. And comfort, when left unexamined, turns into blindness. She didn't ask for permission, didn't check in with her manager, didn't wait to be called. She just walked. Through the concourse, past gate 12, past the lounge, past the locked glass doors. Layla stood nearby, saw her, said nothing, just nodded. Rachel's heels clicked down the hallway toward the private V.I.P pickup zone, where Isaiah was waiting alone. No entourage, no suitcase. Just a man in a gray coat, seated quietly, watching the curb. She didn't clear her throat, didn't rehearse, just stood in front of him. He turned to look. Rachel blinked, but didn't flinch. "I'm not here because they told me to." Isaiah said nothing. "I'm not looking for you to say something back or to fix anything." Still silence. "I didn't see you, not really. I saw what I thought you were. I saw a challenge, a problem, an interruption. And the worst part is, I didn't even question why I saw you that way. I just acted like I had the right." Her voice cracked. "I used rules like armor, not because I believed in them, but because I thought they made me bigger than you." She took a shaky breath. "You didn't make me feel small. You just never gave me the illusion that I was in control." Her eyes welled. But she didn't look away. Isaiah stood slowly. He didn't scowl, didn't smile. He just looked at her. Really looked, like he wanted to see if she could hold his gaze without shrinking. And she did. He nodded once, then said, "You were never supposed to be the gate, just the welcome." Rachel's lip trembled. Isaiah picked up his coat, stepped past her, and entered the waiting car. The door closed behind him. Smooth. Final. No slam. Just the sound of a man choosing to move on with dignity still fully intact. Rachel stood alone, not vindicated, not erased, but seen. Finally, a man sat quietly. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't plead, but when he stayed seated, 1,000 people stood up. Soraya lay curled on the couch, head in her grandmother's lap. On the TV, the video played again, muted this time, just the image of her grandfather, seated in that window seat, calm as stone. She looked up. "Grandma?" she asked. "How did he win?" Her grandmother tilted her head. "He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't fight. So how?" The old woman smiled, brushing Soraya's curls. "He didn't win, baby. He reminded them. They already lost." By the next week, the ripples had turned into waves. One airline publicly committed to rewriting its in-flight conflict protocols, especially on authority, race, and discretion. Another released a statement on implicit bias recognition training. A former airport security officer posted an open letter. "I've been the guy who asked black women to step aside. I've escorted grandfathers off planes because a white family felt uncomfortable. I followed orders. I stayed quiet. Not anymore." The comments under his post were filled with stories people had swallowed for years because there was no moment like this one to speak into. Now there was. Isaiah never reposted, never tweeted, never joined a panel, but the silence around him kept echoing louder than any statement could. At a small college in Baltimore, a classroom of aviation students gathered for their weekly seminar. Today's topic was not fuel systems or weather delays. It was called The Unwritten Rules. power, optics, and passenger perception. A clip played on the screen. Isaiah seated, calm, waiting. The professor asked, "What happened here?" A white male student said, "But he didn't do anything. He just sat there." A black girl beside him leaned forward. Her voice was quiet but steady. "That is doing something." The room stilled. The professor nodded. "Exactly. When someone makes you invisible, the greatest rebellion is refusing to disappear." At a regional airport in Birmingham, Alabama, Gate C-12 had always been ordinary. But now, beside the row of gray waiting chairs, a new plaque had been installed. Small, clean, quiet. It read, "This seat is for those who stayed seated when others tried to erase them," in honor of Isaiah R. Ellison. No fanfare, no press release, but passengers paused. Some read it, some didn't. But the ones who needed it, they saw it, and they sat taller. Another flight, another day. People lined up to board. A new crew greeted passengers with smiles rehearsed in training. An older black woman in a cobalt dress passed first class, her purse tucked close. A college student with braids and headphones followed behind, humming low. And then the camera paused. Row 2, Seat 2B, occupied. Seat 2A, empty. Just a streak of sunlight through the window, brushing the headrest. A young flight attendant, no older than 22, glanced at it while checking the aisle. She didn't say anything, but she nodded, just once, as if remembering a story she hadn't been told, but somehow knew by heart. A man had once sat there. He didn't ask for power, he just refused to give it away, and even though that seat was empty now, the weight of him was still there. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of Isaiah's story. What happened on that plane wasn't just about a seat. It was about dignity, silence, and the quiet power of not backing down. Isaiah didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm the aisle. He stayed seated. And in doing so, he forced the world to look at itself. For so many of us, especially black women, elders, and those who've lived through decades of being told to calm down or step aside, this story isn't new. But it hits different when someone like Isaiah does what we've always dreamed of, hold his ground without needing to fight. I believe we need more stories like this. Stories where grace changes policy, where silence speaks truth, and where one man's stillness shakes the system. If this moved you like it moved me, please like, comment, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. We're just getting started.